Hi, and welcome to the Take the Stage podcast. I'm your host, Alexis Alvarez, and I'm on a mission to help make diversity more of a reality for lower middle market and middle market investment firms. Take the Stage celebrates and amplifies diverse voices and serves as a platform for conversations that encompass a wide range of perspectives. You're going to hear candid conversations that touch on career paths, the not so linear kind, valuable insights, practical advice, and honest stories on navigating and succeeding on the buy side. Today on Take the Stage, we shine the spotlight on Jessica Patton, Managing Director at 5th Century Partners, a purpose-driven private equity firm redefining the industry through intentional culture and a commitment to diversity. We're going to talk about how Jessica's journey from Howard University to roles at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and 5CP shaped her perspective on breaking barriers in finance, preparation and serendipity, and the key roles they played in her career progression, how 5CP leverages diversity and purpose-driven strategies to drive exceptional results in alternative investments, balancing leadership and motherhood with a career on the buy side, and more. Today, we have the fabulous Jessica Patton from 5th Century Partners, and I am really excited for today's episode because this is a long time coming, and besides being matchy-matchy, completely unplanned and completely coincidental, this is going to be a really, really great show. So I am going to have you just take the stage, Jessica. Start by sharing a little bit about your early life and what led you to pursue a career in PE, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. Yes, long time coming, maybe a year or so, but, we make it here. So excited to be here. Sometimes takes some time, but all good things with time, they say. But great to be here. Jessica Patton, by way of background, I'm originally from Detroit. And I'll give kind of a brief rundown. I'll try to be succinct, but also hit some really salient points of how I made it into PE. But I grew up in a working class family. Neither of my parents really had any knowledge of, and neither did I, as well as a result, have any knowledge of finance as a career path. They wanted me to be an engineer or a doctor. A lot of their successful friends were those things, so that was their expectation. But I went to Howard for undergrad, and in college was an interesting experience for me because neither of my parents went to college. So we looked at a bunch of colleges. Actually, I'm going on this college tour in DC and being on Howard's campus, and serendipitously with a bunch of things coming into play, got a full scholarship to Howard. So that's how I ended up there. A very full scholarship. So that was pretty exciting. At the time, I guess when I was a junior or senior in high school, my mom had started working for a financial advisor. So I started to get some exposure to finance through that lens and thought it was super interesting. It married kind of my capacity and interest. And I was always very good at math with just really, I love English language, and it had a technical component, which was when my parents wanted me to be a doctor and engineer, that's what I finally interpreted as they felt like if you had a technical background, it was transportable into any type of career, even if you decided not to become that ultimate thing. So felt like finance had that technical component. So I pursued that at Howard. And I was actually talking to someone about this recently, and I think that once I got to Howard, I started to understand the expanse of what finance could be, from investment banking to other components that at investment banks, that whether it's equity research or sales and trading, I started to understand a lot more of the fulsome capacity of finance beyond advisory. And that's how I started probably to learn about PE as an addition from the sell side to the buy side. So serendipitously, actually, during my college experience, I spent some time at two investment banks, at Goldman Sachs and at JP Morgan. So I got to have a really, good initial experience, and was on that traditional track, I would say, of getting into an investment bank to pursue their financial careers. I figured that out through a lot of the people, and I decided to major in finance. That was the right place to be. And ended up getting this job serendipitously, and that's also a great story of working at a private equity firm. They're probably the only firm that was recruiting on Howard's campus. And I got a last minute interview and ended up starting there post graduation in New York at a consumer focused growth equity firm. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background and insight. Happy to take that anywhere if you have additional questions.
Okay. Awesome. That was a good intro and warm up. So, well, you kind of stopped very early in your career. um,
I mostly just told you how I got into PE. Yeah.
No, that's awesome because that's always a really interesting part of the story. And I was actually having this conversation yesterday because I'm talking to a number of people and firms about how to create more awareness about careers in the alternatives. And so it was a really interesting conversation that I had, and I think I've said this to so many people, but you never have, there's no kid anywhere that wakes up and says, when I grow up, I want to be the managing director of a lower middle market private equity firm that's focused on,
Yeah.
founder and family businesses. No, because unless you have the exposure to that through someone very close to you, right? That's usually how it works. But most people do not. And so the awareness of like what these careers look like, and actually even not even a career, just like what private equity means, what venture capital means, like what any of that means, typically comes very late if you don't have that, exposure. And if you haven't chosen a career in finance, right? Like if you don't know what you're going to do when you get to college, which is pretty much like most students. So I think that that's really interesting. And that's a really good example in your case where you had, kind of things shifted for you when your mom, that very close exposure, gave you that opportunity to just be curious and to, maybe explore. And obviously that was enough to generate that interest to having this really great opportunity, which is not very common to join, because you said you joined directly out of college to a growth equity firm, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So also very, you use the words serendipitous, and that's very much so true. So take us from, your career from this growth equity firm to where you are right now.
Yeah. And before that, I'll say just like one of the key components I feel of my career is very much so serendipity. If you listen to this podcast, How I Built This, which I think a lot of people probably listen to or have heard of it, the guy chronicles how business leaders go from basically nothing, an idea, to like raising funds or not raising funds, and then building businesses that are all brands that people know. But I mentioned that podcast because it really focuses on like luck versus kind of the work. And for me, this like serendipity, and someone said it in someone's quote, which is like serendipity is really, preparedness, like plus some version of luck. And so in my career and in my life, holistically, I felt like a lot of opportunities have come up, but those opportunities come up, and then I have the skill set or whatever it is to move that forward. So that's been a pretty big part of things. And by skill set, I mean also like values. To your point, very curious, like always trying to pull the thread a little bit more to learn more, and that leads to the next thing. So that's one of my like big takeaways, or something I'm always like really thinking about how my career is differentiated and how I went from not having any connections to this like sphere of lower middle market as a founder. But to that point, so I worked at this private equity firm for 3 years. I had a really good fundamental experience. The thing that was different about the private equity firm was it was a first time fund, meaning that I got to wear a lot of different hats. Like I was at a team one of 10. So even though I was at the lowest rank, I still got to have a wide exposure, not only to listening to pitches and building models and being the first rung in, but got some experience in fundraising, got some experience portfolio management overall. So it was a very robust experience for me. What I decided based on that was that I really wanted to get a lot more operational depth of expertise. I felt like my colleagues that were more senior had experience working within companies, and I felt that that would be very valuable. And not only that, I was super interested in just working more deeply. I'd worked with a couple portfolio companies on just that were assigned to me, but I wanted to just be a part of the company. And so I went to do that outside of our portfolio, but worked at a Vestar portfolio company called Roland Foods, also in New York. That was a pretty sizable company, a real middle market company in the call it $200 to $500 million revenue range, but still had just have previously been family owned. And I joined 3 months into their acquisition into PE, and then was able to start to get this really robust experience of what it looks like to help to professionalize a business. And now from the side of the true operator seat. So I was there for 3 years, and that was like both the experiences, both in being in PE and being an operator, were pretty catalytic for me. I'd say both had like investment banking type of feels, like I had the traditional, private equity finance experience. But I think what a lot of people might not realize is like when I was working at like Roland, I was working very hard. It was a very rigorous job, but the return on investment of my time was very significant. Like I learned a lot. I was given a lot of autonomy. I was given P&L exposure. I was given just real sizable problems, and so I put real sizable time to doing them. But they had great return because I learned a lot of systems. I learned a lot of process management, and I helped the company make money. So that was a great experience for me. Speeding this up a little bit, decided to go to business school. Had a great experience on the investing and operating side. I wanted to blend those. I wanted to think about being more entrepreneurial. I wanted to think about bringing more of a purpose-driven lens into the work that I was doing, because I felt like I was like mentoring people outside of work, but couldn't figure out like what my work like helped positively create. And I wanted more of that. I wanted those to be synonymous. So I chose to go to Stanford because I felt like it had a lot of the core components of what I was looking for, as well as like just continuing to expand my network. I went for a lot of traditional reasons that people go to business school. At Stanford, I ended up trying a lot of things, but I ended up back in finance. I really didn't think when I was writing my business school essays I would end up back in finance, but I think I did learn a lot about myself, and it's funny because my friends, people always knew me, always call me like the finance person or finance girl, and like I'm trying to shed that, that personality or that person, and no, it just continued to be me, right? So I learned a lot about myself, and I found my way into venture capital at Stanford again, completely, almost serendipitously, but by way of an introduction through a professor who said there's a fund at Andreessen that I really think that matches your skill set and experience and interest. And I'm going to make the introduction. I think you should be there. And so I, again, got on the early stage, basically the inception of a fund called the Cultural Leadership Fund, of which the vision was to bring more diversity into private equity from an LP perspective, from a founder perspective, and then from a talent perspective. So I did that for a couple of years, and had a really great experience, just really working for the best and the brightest. And that was an experience where I think I really started to understand like the just excellence, and the focus on innovation was really happy. But it also, again, home for me, where I wanted to be, in that I love the innovation economy, but what I missed was like what I call like old Americana type of businesses, the proof of revenue, the longevity of business. And while I think the innovation side is really exciting, it takes a certain type of personality to continue to be consistent and excited about it. But for me, it's like I really want to come back to some more of the private equity, more of the tried and true. And I started to see this opportunity that came up with two prior friends, Marcus and Bruce, who approached me about the opportunity to join as they were thinking about setting up a purpose driven private equity firm, which brought in, for me, this is like the holy grail of my experience in that I've been at first time funds, whether they're themselves or within a fund context. So I have that builder's experience and mindset. My prior experience had driven more of that purpose driven, like impact lens into my work, as well as building really intentional networks to effectuate growth. So I had done that at Andreessen, was able to bring that into 5CP, and then finally I had this like core operating experience, which from an empathy standpoint and from understanding what it takes to scale and being in that somewhat in that founding building seat, like I understood what that takes, and so all those things really have rolled into this role. And we can talk more about like the success of ICP and the type of things that we're doing, but now 4 years in, we've built one fund. We're on a second fund and hoping to close that. So the first fund was just shy of 150. We have a target of 250 for this fund that we're raising now, and we have a team of 13 here in Chicago. So it's been a wild ride of a career. There's still so much more left, but um, that's the story of how 5CP came to be, or how I came to come into 5CP. We can certainly talk more about all of the building of 5CP.
You're you're such a boss. I'm just listening to this, and I knew part of your story already, but listening to really kind of the details um, just highlights the fact that I think you're obviously incredibly bright, obviously to have had this path, but I know that it's more. There's more dimensions to just having the intelligence and the smarts to be able to do what you're doing. So and I want to get into that in a minute,
Yeah.
because I think that's the hard part, right? Is maybe, and you can call it like the soft skills, you can call it, I don't know, we could call it whatever we want, but right, like there's just something else I call it the added dimension, right? That allows you to
Hmm.
be able to have this type of career. But you said something interesting, and I wanted to touch on it because I talk to a lot of, especially a lot of younger women that are just starting out in their careers, and you mentioned, so when you became an operator, how many years post universities, after college, did you have when you came into that operator role?
It was my fourth year after school, so I had 3 years of experience in an investing role, and then I transitioned in my fourth year outside of school. So I always call it like 25, 26 when I
Ugh,
joined.
you're so
Yeah.
young.
Yes.
So young. So young. This is what always blows my mind. This is what always blows my mind is that, like I'm older than you. You're a little bit younger than me, probably quite a bit younger than me. But it's 25, 26, anything under 30, at least in
Oh
my
yeah.
eyes, is really young. Is really, really young, because I feel like now that I'm in my 40s, it's just like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I thought I knew
Of
that
course.
I did not know, right? So to be able to say that you're in this operating role before you're even 30 years old, to me is just that's an incredible success. Um,
Yeah, I'll actually pause there and say it's the people. It's Alexis, it's the people that like can see you and can see the talent and like take bets on you. It's kind of really that. I chose the role. I came out of my private equity experience saying that I really wanted to focus on like a manager and people that would invest in me, because that's what I felt like was a bit missing from the experience. Not that I didn't get it in some shapes and forms and ways, but I wanted someone who would really focus, like help me focus on my growth and push me, frankly, challenge me. And that's always been the case. This is a really tangential story, but my mom like was here with me this past weekend, and she was saying, I had you tested like early on to like potentially get like into the school. I didn't end up sending you to the school, but what the lady said was like that you were super smart, but to never let you like not be challenged, to always like push you forward, because if not, you're going to basically find trouble, because you're just, you need that, like you need that push, you need constant things that are challenging you. And she's like, that always like resonated with me. It was something I thought about. We didn't send you to that school, but it is something that I set up. But that's like who I am by nature. If I get super bored, it's like not a great experience for me. So anyway, long story short, coming into this interview, I had an interview with my manager. Her name was Wei, and she's still one of the most amazing people that I keep in contact like with maybe a couple times a year. But she's just such a great like advocate, and another woman, diverse woman as well. But she it was just such a hard interview. I remember specifically being like, I probably didn't get that. She like gave me such hard case studies. Like I tried to think through all of the things, like, and she was just like completely herself. And then like I got the job, I was like, I definitely don't know how I earned this job, but that's how she was in working with her. She's my greatest advocate. She would give me a lot of rope of which I could potentially like hang myself, but she would also be very much so in the room if I like needed help. Like sometimes we'd be at work until like all out hours, like on computers, like doing like things to make stuff right. But that investment in me, I think, and the investment that other people have made in me has been like the catalyst for growth, despite like age. And so I think finding those people is very hard, but it's kind of one of the things like you know when you know.
Mm-hmm. How do you? So I was going to ask a completely other question, a different question,
Yeah,
but
I'm sure you were, but I was wanted to make sure you heard that part. Yeah.
yeah, no, that point that you just mentioned, because that's, like when I speak to candidates, you can tell like a really like a great candidate from just a good candidate, right? Like they're both good candidates, but like there's a few things that really distinguish someone that is really truly someone that you need to hire this person, right? Because they have a few qualities that not everyone has. And so one of
Mhm.
those qualities I find is that they are relentless and very determined to surround themselves with people that they're going to be able to learn from, right? Like that's something that they have, that just it's this desire to be able to be with people that they can see as teachers almost in
Mhm.
many ways. And not everyone has that, right? A lot of people get kind of dazzled by like the appeal of a firm, or just like the name, right?
Yeah.
But like the really really strong candidates are really tuned in to the leadership and how they're gonna if there's gonna be stretch in their careers, and if there's that platform, right? So going to your point, because you did say it's hard to find that, but that was a catalyst in your career. What do you think someone, telling your younger self, like what should you be on the lookout for to find those types of people when you are, when you're engaging and when you're talking? What do you think are some of those signs that maybe would tell them, yes, that is the kind of person that, is going to, is
Mm.
going to invest in you, has the potential to build you?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and I'll muddle through it. I think one thing that always like helps me, or like helps me now in my post business school phase, is like they say in finance, historical performance doesn't predict the future, but in people work, the historical performance will certainly be indicative of how they'll act. And so I think with any relationship that you're building or a job that you're potentially looking to take, is you want to understand who is this person meant to other people that they've managed? What does that look like? And you want to particularly understand that relationship. So, if possible, in terms of like if you're far enough ahead to ask for that, I would say, oh, I'd love to. I'd also want to be bought into this role, and people love that. They love to hear that you're studying that side too. The right person should. I'd love to speak to some of your team just to understand interactions, or what I could expect, and then have really good questions for those people that get to what is this manager like? Of the managers you've had, where would you rank this person? What's really special about them, or the work that you've done together? Just asking really curiosity based questions to get to the what it could look like to them. And I think what you also should understand is like a lot of this is a balance of like of the EQ of what you're listening for as much as what they're saying. So it should be like, oh, you should hear passion, you should hear excitement, you should hear drive, you shouldn't hear like, oh, like Rose is nice, like she's a good manager. Yeah, she'll give me good work, or like if it's kind of like that could be the person's personality, but there should still be some inflection related to who they are. So I think it's important to listen to the message as much as like how they're saying it. Beyond that, I do think it's like asking curiosity based questions to the person, like what could I expect of our relationship or working together. Yeah, just trying to suss out in that moment, yeah, how they work, and match that up to like how you think you want to work. I think to your point, this best candidates, some of the best people want to be pushed, and have that kind of great determination. We'll figure things out, but all people like do that differently. And so the last thing I'll say is like there's the interview process, but it's also setting up a relationship for success in the future. And I think that the best people do that really well, which is like there's a book, and I wish I had my bookcase up here fully, but it's like I think it's the first 90 days, something around like the first 90 days of work. And I think that in my all my roles, I've looked back at it and I haven't read it again, but I've basically mapped out what does 90 days of success look like in this role. Because once you build trust and rapport with someone, like those first 90 days is what really matters. Once you build that trust and rapport, they will also be more likely to want to invest in you. They'll trust you. You'll build a common relationship. So each of those rungs of interviewing thoroughly, helping to find the right person, and then building that trust and rapport by having a very strong like first 90 days is like I think the key to like some of those are the ingredients to success. So if you collect each of those, you kind of have a good soup. Again, you have to work on them. I think the big plug I'll make here is like you have chat GPT or other AI things where you can say what's a good question to ask like a manager to know that they're going to help challenge me and help get me to where I want to be. So use these like things that are already out there to leverage like how to ask good questions, and how to vet people. But then it just takes some time, right? You got to do this a couple times to figure out like, oh, like I noticed like I asked this the one person that this other role this question, and then I did it again over here. Now I can compare and contrast and kind of get a sense of what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. That is everything that you've said is sensational advice. Sensational advice, and I think that is just gold, and really helpful to someone that's not even necessarily like starting out in their career. I mean, I think what you've said is applicable across different levels. As you continue to
Yeah.
build your career, because I think, especially when we're young, we think that once you get to a certain level, it kind of just stops, right? You're like, no, I've done it, like, cause I'm there. But really, like the really great people are always looking to be better or to
Yeah.
better themselves in one way or another, right? It might not necessarily be like from a technical perspective, like it is when you're younger, right? It takes on a
Yes.
different form. But I mean, you're always looking to surround yourself with that. So I think that's really like a really poignant uh, you know commentary that you just shared.
Cool.
The other thing that I wanted to, and then we'll move on, but I wanted to also touch on this is because you also said, again, going back to that operator role, it was, in not so many words, it was a hard environment, like a
Mhm.
rigorous work environment, right? And you wanted to get your ROI. And I've heard this many times. And so I want to repeat it because I think it is especially important when you are just starting out in your career, because a lot of, as we know, like this is investment banking, and in a lot of firms on the buy side, it's tough. especially as an early career professional, you're grinding, you're working, really long hours, and it's a commitment. And
Yeah.
so I hear a lot of young, young professionals who, will, like kind of complain about that. I mean, not complain, but they'll make that statement. And what I always tell them is essentially what you've said. And, in that, go where you're, as a, like, you're going to have to grind if you want a career, in this, but you're gonna have to grind anywhere. If
Yeah.
you want to have success in your career. Right. But go where you're going to get, especially when you're young, that really solid if you're on an investment team, that really solid deal experience. Because
Yeah.
then once you have that under your belt and you're solid and you have the fundamentals in that foundation, you can then move to another firm. You can then progress. And then there you can be much more selective in terms of culture and in terms of all these things that maybe you don't necessarily have, you know,
Right.
right? Like, would you, does that kind of
Yeah.
capture what you were saying here?
Yeah. I think what you're alluding to is you want to build a strong foundation. And once you have the foundation, you can start to add on the characteristic differentiating pieces that you want. So if you're building a foundation of a house, they're like all the same. Like they're all the same. It's the key, components. So it's kind of like traditional. And then you can start to say like, oh, like I like brick or this or that. And so I think the same way to the component is like and it's something that I strongly believe is like you kind of got to pay your dues, like is effectively what you're saying. You got to put in the time, and it's not. I think when I'm talking to people, they feel like it's like, oh, just because. Like it's not a just because. Like it's actually really important because in your first like couple of years, and that could be a range of time. I think you are learning just as much about the work that you're doing as well as yourself. Like, and that would be what the relentless like pursuit is about. Is the relentless pursuit is like pursuit of like, um, yes, like how do I, how are deals done? How do I learn some of the technicals, of the sales side? Like what's the arc of the work and doing well? But like that's like part of it. And maybe that's like honestly 30%. I think like 70% of it is really how do I manage my time? Um, what am I really good at? How do I find ways to be organized? How do I prioritize? Like, how do I build relationships? How do I communicate when things are going well, but also communicate when things are going awry? How do I navigate feedback like given to me and work on improvement and show that I'm improving actively? Um, how do I encounter a problem solve a situation that I've never encountered before? I'm on the phone with someone, they tell me something and like now I don't know what to do with that information, or build this model and I've never built this like one core thing into the model. So that is like the fabric, I think, of a good like first career, whether that's like your first, 3, 5 plus years. I think those experiences give you the right fundamentals, the right foundation to now build on and say, okay, I've had a lot of those situations come up. They're going to come up in different contexts in the future, but I've managed and I've done a lot of those things. How I think in the past this was like really in vogue a couple of years ago. It'd be like the 10,000 hour kind of thing where you've done something for a lot of time, and there's a lot of people who kind of tore that down. But the point is, it's not maybe not 10,000 hours, is that you put in a lot of time into learning these things about yourself, like figuring out the arc of like how you do work and how you manage. And then once you have that strong foundation, now you can do a whole lot of things on top of that, whether you decide to continue to pursue investing or, go into some other world. You still have these like really strong like work principles and work values for which you can navigate, frankly, I think almost like any situation.
Mhm. That again, super solid advice. I'm going to take every time I do a podcast episode, I feel like everyone just has these really great nuggets
Yeah.
of advice that are they're just so valuable, because no one tells you this when you're starting, right? Like I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the wisdom comes with the age and with the experience, right? And it wouldn't be fun if we knew all the answers, right? You wouldn't have that
No.
stretch. But that again, another really piece of solid advice. So let's move on. So talk to us a little bit about 5CP, and let's go straight into kind of you as a co-founder. Talk to me a little bit about the values that you have integrated into the firm's culture.
Yeah, great question. There are a number of them. I think since we're talking about like really work ethic at our last question, I think a part of it is excellence. And we really focus on that. We have to be excellent to get to the returns that we want to which are, really top returns. So we have to do that consistently. And excellence means like doing great work, but sometimes it means it means prioritization. It means getting things through. It doesn't mean perfect. I guess when I say excellence, it doesn't mean perfect work, because I think these two can be misconstrued as like the same, but that doesn't mean excellence is perfect. Sometimes like excellence means like you got to get something 80% done, and it's like it's really good, but it's not perfect, right? And nothing ever will be perfect. I think even if you think that you're building a perfect model, like when we underwrite investments, it's like it's not going to be perfect. Everything should make sense, of course, like things should flow accordingly, but when we go out into the real world and start to invest in, or more so create value under that investment, sometimes they go according to plan, and frequently they don't go perfectly according to plan. But anyway, it means just like bringing that mindset to the work. It's about for us as well, like in doing great work, but also saying, oh, I see that this thing isn't getting done. Like, let's, for example, one of my colleagues was like, oh, I really think we need a CFO summit to help our CFOs to understand what we look for, what's important to us. So, let's do that. Let's think outside of the box. Just bringing that like ownership mindset to the work is a big component. So there's a lot under excellence. Another big one for us is really transparency. And transparency doesn't mean that for some firms it means that like you can see everything and you know everything at all the same time, and everyone's that it doesn't necessarily mean that. There is some hierarchy or dissemination of information. I think that's just natural, and it's good to have that, but it means that like we are all rowing in the same boat together. It means that there's good information flow. While we're fundraising, everyone knows like where we are, and what we're doing, and the same thing as it relates to like portfolio company performance. So we have some great days, we have some days that are hard, but the teams are communicating. We're all aware of things, even if there's the certain deal team that's not working on it. And there's good information flow as it relates to feedback for employees. We're always transparent about this is like where you are on the growth trajectory. This is how you're working against scorecards. This is the feedback for what you need to improve. So transparency for us is like a really big component. I think for all of us in our careers, like removing that political piece of the work by just saying like, here's what it is. I'm going to communicate clearly to you, not in shrouded ways, is really important. So that's a big one for us. And then I think the other thing about our culture is like and there's a bunch of things I talk about, but the last one I mentioned is really like kind of we win together. So in this like mentality about like some firms are very much so like this is my deal, like I win, like I have the compensation like tied to that, and everything is about me and egocentric on this deal. While we have deal teams, we really win together. There's not like deals. You won't see like a lot of clarity on the outside about this person that did this deal or they did that. We all went together. So the success of us building a successful firm is making great investments. And even if a deal team did that and now we got to, partially dig ourselves out of a hole, hopefully that's not frequently, we're doing it together. We need to work on both the celebration as well as the improvements as a team, because that's what it takes to win. And then I think the other part of that is like we celebrate together too. So we like to ensure that we celebrate the wins. We'll go every year or so out of the Chicago area to some fun places to celebrate the success that we've we've had thus far, in recognizing and just building that team rapport. And beyond that, in Chicago, we'll go to happy hours and do things just to spend core time together, because we think it's really important, to building the culture and just having really good rapport with one another. So yeah, those are some of the key cultural barometers. And the last thing I'll say about the culture is we've been super intentional about building it from the ground up and from the beginning. We think it's the people are core to achieving our goals. So we've invested accordingly, in just in thinking about it often and early and often.
Mm-hmm. I mean, 5CP culture sounds, um, aside from sounding amazing, just with the culture that you described, I really want to draw attention to it because it seems, well, I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of firms that I think are standout firms, not because, let me word it carefully. Um, I think I know a lot of, like, we know a lot of the same people, and I think there's a lot of really great firms out there, but there's not a lot of firms where I would say, or there's a select amount of firms where I would say, that is truly, a culture, like a culture I am comfortable placing my candidates into. And
Yeah.
that's right. Like
I
I can go to bed at night knowing that I think the work that I'm doing with working with firms, like you and similar, um, I know that, okay, the candidates that I'm working with are going to, they're going to have great careers, and they are going to, be part of this really fantastic culture. And I think that it's really, it's unfortunately it's these kinds of firms that are outliers, right? Because the majority of
yeah.
the majority of firms are not necessarily like this. And so this is why I really want to highlight the fact that there are firms like 5CP that do exist. Now, of course, there are other great firms out there with fantastic cultures, right? But in proportion, when we look at like kind of just the number that exists, unfortunately, we don't have as many that I think are as intentional and purposeful,
Yeah.
as you guys. So I really want to highlight that and applaud you guys for, taking that approach, because I think that is, well, I don't know, it aligns with me. It aligns with kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
my values. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention, because I think I've told you, like, I get so many, I have so many conversations with disheartened candidates that, they just don't think, because they've had great deal experience, but unfortunate kind of cultural experiences,
Yeah.
that they become disheartened and don't think that there's a space, that this is the space for them. And I tell them, no, there are great firms out there. You have to be extremely intentional in finding them. And so you guys are exactly, an example of that. But I wanted to also ask you, as a diverse founder, and I believe there's three of you, all three of you are diverse founders. So tell me how what your commitment to diversity and DEI is, or what that looks like for you.
Yeah. I think I could take this in a couple different ways, but I think what I'll say is like, we have a focus on it, but I wouldn't even call it a commitment. I like call it like what we think is right, or just how we naturally act, I guess, maybe. Like it's just like a DNA thing. And I think that's the best way it's done. Like I think that DEI should not be like a numbers game, or like a right and wrong. If we hit this much in diversity, we're on the right side, versus if we don't. Like, of course, we focus on being super thoughtful, ensuring that we have diverse pipelines when we hire people, that we're considering, a range of folks. But I think that that's just kind of inherent to like the what we like to see, like, component, I guess. And so when I think about like our, DEI, is that we just feel inherently, as people from, diverse places, both demographically and socioeconomically, that we think that diversity continues to play such a strong role across the base, whether it's the candidates that we hire, the portfolio company leaders that we hire, the board leaders that we hire, that, some of the best and brightest are people who come from these pools, but also naturally our networks are diverse too. So that's kind of the cool thing about us. I do think it's hard for folks who are, if I was a white male and like I went to predominantly white institution and, working predominantly white places, that is inherently my network, but my network is super diverse as a result of my experiences. And so we're able to like bring some of the best and brightest into 5CP in a multifaceted way of our work just because of who we are. But also, I think people are very much so attracted to working with us, whether they're diverse themselves or believe that diversity is a key advantage to growth. Folks want to work with us because they believe in that no matter what color they are. So we've been able to, we've been really lucky and in a great place to continue to deploy that like across our work that we do. And in terms of like maybe more of a like how we more formally integrate that into our like strategy, again, it's really continuing to build a diverse team. I think I did the stats. We have our annual meeting coming up next week, and it's still like our team is like 80% as 80% diversity as it relates to like diversity of not race and diversity of gender. So that just continues to be the fact. Do we study it? Do we, say that there's a hurdle rate? Not necessarily, but we continue to have really strong pipelines there. I think as it relates to the people that we employ, over 50%, over like 48% are have diverse like race, and then over 50% are women. So that's pretty exciting. And again, that's something that we like perfectly manage, but it like happens as a manifestation of like the work that we do and the things that we happen to care about. And then on our boards, over 75% of the like board directors are diverse again by gender or race. So when it comes down to the work, we do it. We think it's core, but it's also just really a natural part of our DNA that we're lucky to deploy. And a lot of our strategy that we haven't alluded to is really, we think diversity and it is an advantage, and therefore we go after it in both a strategic way, but in a way that just is really just core to 5CP.
Mm-hmm. I love it. It's intrinsic.
Yeah,
and that's
intrinsic is the right word.
That's I don't know. It's really hard to explain. And that's, when I first started in my career, and I started, I ended up kind of just getting very focused on finding diverse talent. And for me, it was very much so like oh, there's just, like everyone's the same on this team. Let me see. I was working with a client and was like, let me see if I can just bring more women into the candidate pool. And I got very, very intentional, but it was just, no one told me to do it. It was like common sense to me, because it was like, oh, like it just makes sense to have different types of, of people on a team.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's exactly, it's part of your DNA. So that is, again, an outlier, because not everyone is thinking about it like you guys, because it isn't necessarily intrinsic, right? Like that's the thing. Okay. So I want to hit another point before we start to wrap up, because what we haven't talked about, which again is another really important topic that I feel I have many conversations around, is your career. And you haven't mentioned this, but you are also a mother, and a relatively new mother. So balancing this kind of career as at the level that you're at with the career that you have, is obviously no small feat. So how do you manage these roles, these family roles, these personal roles, and your professional roles? And how do you think, so it's a two-part question, how do you manage these roles, and then how do you feel that those experiences have maybe shaped your approach to leadership and the way you support the work environment for other women?
Yeah, good question. I think taking your latter question first, I think that like despite like not being a mom, like something about being a woman and has always been like a core part of my career. So I don't think I've like necessarily changed how I think about like my mentorship or how I support other women. I think that's always been inherent. Like I think just as like part of being a woman is like in part being nurturing. I think that and also a care for people based on like my career and my growth, like really wanting to give back and continue to be that like person that is insightful and like helps to drive like core insights, and it just helps other people get here. Because like if I think about the things that I care about most, like that's probably frankly the top, like that paired with like allocating capital to businesses that I think could be a positive influence on society. Like those two things go in hand. So doing, those are the two top priorities for me, being capital allocator, but also like bringing other people up. So yeah, just based on my experience, it's always been like number one. So I don't think it's necessarily been influence. It just continues to become like more and more important, to me, and have that core resonance and priority, and finding ways to do that and building relationships. Like I take sometimes way too many like coffee chats or dates or whatever with people to find ways to support them because I care about it. But in terms of being a mom, the question was around how I do it all, something to that extent.
How do you manage? How do you
How do I
manage?
manage? Yeah, like it's really having the right support ecosystem for me, and I'm always like iterating on that and figuring out what it like looks like being 11 months like into this now. But um, yeah, I think the core things are finding the right support. So having a really great like partner has been great, but also having a really great nanny and family to be able to, add roles that when I'm not with my baby directly, they can be enriching her and, providing her with a lot of like opportunity has been like paramount, but also spending time and finding time to invest in myself in part has been a big part of it, because I'd say taking a step back for me, having a baby that I didn't fully realize is like now I do feel like frankly I have like these two full-time jobs. So in one, both never end. There's never like a, clock out. My mom, funny enough, used to say like, oh, when do they let you out of work, or when they get you out of work, or basically like when do you clock out? I was like, I never clock out. Like I work in a knowledge work space. Like you have to stop asking me that. It's like we don't clock out. Like we leave our computers. Yes, like I do that, but like frankly, like our computer is everywhere because it's my phone. But anyway, same thing with being a mom. It never kind of ends. So for me, it's having the right like support system, the right mechanisms, making sure I get gym time like for myself, to accomplish the kind of like key goals that I have. And yeah, it's like constantly iterating. I think that's a big part that motherhood teaches you, is like there's new challenges like every day. And I talk to moms like yourself, like people who have kids that are getting older, and the challenges just become different. And so for me, it's helped me a lot to just realize, like, frankly, a lot of stuff doesn't matter. A lot of things are day by day, and you just have to be able to like shift and be more fluid than ever, just to realize like this is I can accomplish like core things. Certain things are important, setting up the right support ecosystem. But if your baby decides like today isn't a good day, they don't feel well, like that's where you're at. That's like where you're spending time. So it's been a really good, like a really rigorous, I was thinking yesterday, like wow, what a crazy like year of learnings, 2024, just in terms of like self and all of the things. But that's kind of like where I am with it. I think it's also one thing that you might realize in your career is like you're like, oh, I've gotten like really good at this, like I'm the best at name, whatever the skill set is. But like being a mom, you don't become like the best at it. You just, you continue to strive like at it. And so it's like such a good challenge in that way. I'd say like it's definitely, of all the things I do, it's like my harder job.
It aligns with that pattern that you have of always looking for a challenge. Now you met your
Oh yeah,
match.
yeah. This is like the challenge where you're like, oh, okay, you don't like really get to like break, even in your career. Sometimes you have challenges and you have things that you're really working on, but like you'll ascend that. You'll be like, I did that, I've done that, cool. Like I get to stand on the mountain peak for a while. Not so with being a mom. You're like back down.
Oh, I'm 12 years into it, and there are still days like I have no idea what I'm doing. Right? I'm 12 years into this.
The most growth experience that you'll
I
ever have.
mean, it's a learning experience, and there are, like one of the things is like, yeah, sometimes you have really great days, and then there are days like where you just or weeks that you just don't have, you have really not so great times. And that's just, that's what it is. But like you said, you have to kind of be fluid. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I think, as mothers, we learn.
Yeah.
But I want to highlight the fact that, that you are doing it, and I'm sure you're doing a fabulous job. And again, for, other women, because like I've said it so many times, like I talk to so many women, young women, who just don't see compatibility between having a family and having a career on the buy side. And I'd like to be able to point them to, all these different women, because there are a lot of women that have, most people I know that are, senior, have families. And so I think it's really important to really spotlight those, that talk about it and that normalize it, right? Yeah, like, okay, you have a baby, so what? Tell me something more.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's finding the right people. It all comes back to that, and finding the right team for which you see people that, have kids or have young kids and that they're doing it. I think it's harder to go to a team where they're like, my kids are 20, or, they just have all these special circumstances, or there's a lot of people who don't have kids. So like that's the other like side of things in terms of drilling towards like people and personalities. Like you also have to look at like just like what do these people lives look like, and what's the possibility of like doing a career while being a parent, like at any place. And I think that's like core. So unfortunately, like as we talked about, you continue to have to find firms that like do that, but there are firms that are like that. That I know of, but it's hard. But it is like it's hard. It's 100% hard. That doesn't stop, even if you're at a firm where like having kids is acceptable.
We need to find a way to say that in a different way. So
Sorry, running both of your careers, meaning being a full-time parent and like having your job is acceptable. That's maybe a better way to say that.
Yeah, okay. All right. So just to start wrapping up, Jessica. So, what advice? I mean, you've given lots of advice, but I like to end the episode with this. But what advice, if you haven't already said this, would you offer to all those especially aspiring female leaders, coming up and comers, who aim to forge a similar path?
Yeah, I think a couple things really resonate with me that I like to tell people. Like one is like is figuring out what your true passion is. It's like and that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of like internal like searching, but like whether it's in investing or something else, I think continuing to turn the cars, especially in your early career, like taking strong bets about like what you think is important is really great, because the way I think about it is like in your 20s, it's like a great time to test and trial. I'm not saying they should be doing like jobs for a year. I think that's not what I'm saying at all. And I think that some people are thinking about it in that way, but like that's not what I'm saying. Finding spaces and opportunities and places to really really test out assumptions about the things that like you might like or might want to do is great. And so if you realize 2 years into something, to whatever, like this isn't it, and occasionally 1 year you can move, but you don't want to have like a crazy resume. But like at the same time, starting to build like core relationships with people that can also like help you on that journey is key. So anyway, 20s and even early 30s, like some good like test grounds. I think by the time you get to like 30s, mid 30s particularly, it's great to be able to say like I really have a good sense of like these are the things that like really drive me. This is also what I'm like good at, and this is what, maybe if you're able to bring in that like this is what like brings in some purpose. Like it's great to start thinking about where can I navigate, or what could that look like. And then how I think about it is like by your 40s, hopefully you are able to be in that seat that you can drive like a longer career in. But anyway, I guess I want to say like continuing to hone that, and a lot of it is not just by switching jobs, which I more so demonstrated, but just like asking yourself like questions, like asking other people questions about their careers, just really like providing the right like learning ground, like based on curiosity. And then the last thing I'll say based on that is like really building strong like networks. Like you don't have to go to business school to build a strong network. Yes, I went to business school, so obviously that's something I did within the arc of it. But I really did consider what would it take to not spend all that money and to do it myself. And I think if I would have something I do wish I would have been doing in my early 20s is just like starting conversations with people and starting to reach out to them and ask them about like certain things or just like building a rapport. If I would thought like, oh, I want to start my own like fund at sometimes like there's nothing wrong at 23, 24 and start talking to people who founded a firm. And actually even better, if you've been keeping in contact with them somewhat, like that's like great, you could talk to them in 10 years, you already have a relationship. And I just think like taking like really strong like bets on yourself, really thinking about like strong network. Those are the core things. And what do I mean by like building networks? I mean like literally just reach out to people like on LinkedIn. Like you don't have to know them. Yes, it's great if you can find an introduction. We all know that that's like the number one. If it's like, oh, I know Alexis knows this fund manager, ask her to introduce me. Great, that's number one. But if you don't know them and you're like, I really want to hear about them, there's no risk. There's only reward to just like reach out to someone on LinkedIn or cold email them, because I think a lot of people, if you put together like a great like email that's personalized and tailored, like I really want to learn from you. Here's some things that I think are really interesting and want to ask you. Can I get 15, minutes of your time? It would be surprising that most people would like answer those emails. So I think again, the things I want to emphasize is like building really strong like networks and taking appropriate risks commiserate to where you think that you want to go. Those are my big ones.
Yes, yes. I loved everything that you said, because I say the same thing. No, that you like everything, the asking piece, right? And that's really hard to understand when you're a little bit younger. I wrote a post on LinkedIn this week, and it was titled like "Nice Girls Don't Ask," but or do they? Because it's all about like especially with younger women. Women in general have or and again I'm generalizing, but have this reluctancy to ask because they don't want to be a bother. I've heard like all kinds of things, and I'm always trying to correct them to say, well, how are you going to get anything if you don't ask for it, right? Like you have to ask. And that's one of the differences that I see like a lot of the times with male candidates or just men in
Yeah.
general. They're not afraid to ask. A man would never say, I don't want to be a bother. Like I've never heard a man really say that. Like I don't really want. They don't
Yeah.
care. Like they just go ahead and ask. And so that's like one of the things that I'm always preaching to women is that you have to go out there and ask, and you have to build the tribe. So you have to network, and you don't need to. I mean, yeah, like you said, if you have that connection, that's great. But start on LinkedIn, and one thing I will add is that even if you reach out to someone once and they don't respond, you need to
Yeah.
follow up. You need
It takes 3 times for me to follow up. Like I really meant to follow up, but like once you message me, then this thing happened that I had to go attend to, and I completely got distracted. And so I think a good way to say it is like you need to be in relentless pursuit of your own growth. Similar to like if you're going to work in a gym and you're going to build your arms or whatever it is, you got to put in the reps, like you got to put in the work, but you also have to be like in your own like in the front seat of like driving your growth. And I think if you think about it like that, or you take on that persona, that perspective is that like I have to be relentless about my pursuit of my own growth. I think you can think about it a little bit differently. Or sometimes it helps to be like, oh, like I'm not me. I'm pick a new persona or that you're going to operate in, and every time you email people, just wear that persona, like be bold, whatever like that bold personality is like for you, be that person then, and then wait for the chips to fall. But like it's you got to find a way to, like, to your point, like shift your mindset.
Yes, yes. No, I liked everything that you well, everything that you've said, but especially that that last piece, because I think it's really I don't think enough people put enough or put as much value on that as they should, especially when they're younger. Because if you spend those early years really cultivating those relationships, like you said, like in 10 years or, not even 10 years, earlier than that, you have a really great network.
Yeah.
And it really is, it's not necessarily about who you know, but it's also about like, who's willing to advocate for you when it really counts, right? Like that's another way to kind of look at it. Like when you're trying, like in your job search or, whatever stage you're in. So, well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining me. I think this has been a really great episode. I really enjoyed it. I love highlighting 5CP. I think it's, the work that you guys are doing is amazing. The way that you've started and what you're continuing to do, has so much potential for this space. And so I'm excited to see, how it continues to grow and to see its success. So thank you again for taking the stage.
Thanks, Alexis. Appreciate the opportunity.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Take the Stage. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To hear past shows, please go to our website, career-rockstars.com. If you are a company or candidate who would like to work with Career Rockstars, reach out on LinkedIn or send an email to Alexis at career-rockstars.com. Thanks again, and until next time.